All right, so in the first chapter, we want to look a little bit more at how people change their attitudes. Basically, you can imagine changing something from you like something, you do not like something, you believe something, you do not believe something, etc. How does this process play out? And I think in the beginning, in the 50s and 60s, when people started to look at attitude change and how we can change a person's attitude in a more scientific way, they started from a very normative way, right? You can think about it as basically there's a sender here on the left and he's trying to tell us something and we are listening attentively, and then we're saying, oh, okay, he is an expert in the field. The information that he presents is very legitimate. Okay, now I will change my mind. This is often kind of like associated with the Yale approach to persuasion, which was a large effort in the beginning of the 50s and 60s in trying to understand how people get persuaded by something else. A very normative approach, a very idealized way of how things should work. But let's have a look at how we often are tried to get influenced by, how people often try to influence other people. And we can easily and quickly see that there's at least another way of influencing us that is not so rational, that's not so intelligence-based. Here is a picture of a debate for, I think it's the 2016 presidential debates between Dr. Carson, who is a neurosurgeon, a pediatric neurosurgeon, so he works on the brains of young children, and on the right is Donald Trump. So here they're in a debate, and now you see, and you can watch the video on yourself, the moderator of this debate is asking Dr. Carson, says, like, you're a neurosurgeon, you're an expert, a medical expert, and you know the literature. What would you tell Donald Trump why you think there's no link between autism and vaccinations, right? So here on the left, we have an expert, somebody who knows his stuff really well, who is a neurosurgeon, studied medicine. Also, his message is really important, right? He has literally hundreds of studies on his side showing that there's no link between autism and vaccination. So he starts by talking, well, I think Donald Trump, he's an intelligent man. I refrain from making any accents here. He's an intelligent man, and there's so many studies out there, and I think if you would read the studies, then he can see, obviously, that there is no connection between autism and vaccinations, and I trust that he'll look at the scientific research, which unequivocally shows there is no connection. Okay, very much kind of like this Yale approach, this normative approach is Dr. Carson here taking. And now we come to Donald Trump, right? Slightly different approach. He's like, I want to respond. So I don't know anything about the scientific research. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but I know there's like autism is a pandemic and something is going wrong here, and we have to address that. And just recently, I have this couple friends of mine, and they just have this little baby, and this little baby, they went to the doctor, and the doctor gave it a vaccination. The vaccination, like the syringe, it looked like something for a horse. It was massive, and they rammed it into the arm of the baby, and 2 days later the baby gets a fever, and then a month later the baby has autism. I don't know anything about the research, but that scares me. So basically, there are two very different ways of trying to persuade you, the listener, that there is no link between autism and vaccination. So one which is more based on rational arguments on the left, and then Donald Trump, who's more appealing to feelings on the right. You can form your own judgment for now. Which route do you think is more effective? Let's have a look at something we cited in some of our research at the beginning, showing that on climate change. And here we are finding that basically, while the scientific community is more and more convinced that climate change is happening, that it's man-made, and it's a dramatic problem for us all, the US population, for instance, gets less and less convinced that this is an issue. So the scientific evidence is increasing. We should be more and more persuaded, if we follow this normative model of persuasion, that climate change is happening, but it seems less people are. How can that be? There's another one where we are trying to be influenced, obviously, and that is an advertisement. And obviously, advertisement often doesn't kind of send out any message about their product. All they send out is, here here, handsome George Clooney looking very handsomely at us. He's drinking the cafe that we are supposed to buy. So there's not even a message that's been sent. There's not even an attempt to trying to persuade us via information. And I think these examples obviously make it very obvious that there's not just one route in which we can be influenced. No, social psychology would say there are actually two routes. So this is the most famous model that's trying to describe these two routes, is the Elaboration likelihood model of persuasion. We come throughout to this again and again, and I think by the end of this session today, you will have a really good understanding of the model. But let me kind of highlight the key factor here. So there are two different routes, the peripheral route and the central route. There's the persuasive message. Let's say Dr. Carlson is telling us about the importance of empirical studies to validate the link between or disvalidate the link between autism and vaccinations. So this is kind of like something for the central route. The central route gets activated. We kind of listen to it intensively. We process this with high effort, with deliberation. We look at the pros and cons, and then we change our attitude. Okay, so here this is called the central route. The central route is basically characterized by a very deep processing of the information, and that then leads to attitude change if our processing indicates so. And there's a peripheral route that I try to communicate or illustrate here with George Clooney, with the climate change, or with Donald Trump and his take on the vaccinations, and that's called the peripheral route, right? So here we are not trying to analyze the message really. We take a clue, for instance, an emotional reaction we have, and that will either lead us to change our message or not. So we don't put much effort in there. We're saying, oh, Donald Trump, I don't like him, so I don't listen to him. Hence, I just reject whatever he says, and hence I will either not change or change my attitude, but not related to his message. Or you might be, oh, Donald Trump, he's a good guy. Whatever he says, that kind of speaks to me, okay. Or you take your emotions that are evoked by that. We will talk about this in detail when the peripheral route is activated and when the central route is activated. I want to give you a bit of a better understanding using some of my research for these two routes, okay? So imagine you're here, you just came to my lab, I invited you to participate in a lab study, and there you meet a fellow student or a fellow participants, you greet each other, and I come to you and tell you, guys, you're playing together a real estate game, an estimation game. We're interested in better understanding how people evaluate or form valuations of properties, and hence we invited the two of you to join us today here. So then you have a little chat with each other, and then you go to separate rooms, testing rooms, and each of you do the same task there. So what you would see first is you would see a real estate item, like a house, okay, and underneath the house you see a price. Here, for instance, 1 million, and then you're asked to say, do you think this price of the house is higher or lower? Okay, so you would say that, it looks like a really nice house, there's a little bit of like a lake here or something. I think the real price is higher than the displayed price. 1 million is too low. And then I, in the beginning, give you some money. Now you can invest some of your money into your bet, okay? So for instance, I'm kind of sure that this is correct. I invest 40% of my money on this higher bet. And then you see what the partner did. So sometimes the other person, you see now what the other person thought. So maybe in one case, the other person thought also that the property's real value is higher than the displayed value. So you agree, and sometimes you disagree. So here the partner's judgment is lower. And now I give you another chance to change your investment. So you can't change your thought, whether it was higher or lower, but you think like, okay, maybe if you kind of saw what your partner is doing and their investment, basically their confidence in their guess, then you have a final chance to change your investment. So you can change your investment again. So just to kind of remind you, you basically make your own bet, then you see the partner's bet here and their investment, and then you have a final additional chance to change your investment in value. So now I can use basically the difference between this, your first investment and your second investment, to figure out how much the partner influenced you. Okay, so here you would say like, okay, he influenced me by 5, you changed your thought and increased it by 5. So we call this the change in wager. Now here you can see the 3 different kind of conditions we were interested in. We had a confirming condition. This is when both of you agreed. We have a disconfirming condition when you and the other person disagreed in this experiment. And we had one condition where it's like, oh, on this round you actually can't see anything that your partner did. Okay. And then here on the y-axis you see the change in wager. So the higher it is here, the more the influential your partner was. So let's first look at when there's no opinion provided. This is this condition here. You can see that participants did not change their mind at all. And then you can see, okay, when the partner confirms their opinion, then people change dramatically their wager. They increase their wager by quite a bit. Okay, so it seems like on average the other person's information is valued. But you can see a dramatic drop in this influence for disconfirming opinion. So here people go down a little bit, but not by much. So the total difference here and here is, so the difference in kind of how much they changed here and here is quite dramatic. So people change their mind much more for a confirming opinion than a disconfirming opinion. And in our data, actually, there's no difference between agreeing and a disagreeing partner or a disconfirming opinion and no opinion provided. So if you didn't see anything else, or if your partner disagreed with you, both of them were similarly influential, that is not influential at all. So what has this to do with kind of the like the central and the peripheral route? So we did this experiment while people were in a scanner. So we were in Virginia, where they have a place. This is basically one room. In the middle there's a glass wall and there are 2 scanners next to each other. So participants were doing this while being in the scanner. And now what you can see here is basically the 2 different reactions to agreements and disagreements. So if you saw that your partner agreed, then subsequently you took the information your partner provided into account. So here the posterior medial frontal cortex is activated, PMFC is activated, and you can posterior medial frontal cortex, sorry, the PMFC is activated, and you can see here that the information that the partner provides is tracked. Yet when the partner disagreed, you can see nothing happens in this area. This brain area is basically an area that indicates how likely it is that you're right or wrong. You can see that there's nothing happening when you see a disagreeing partner. So in other words, the process that basically happens that explains that is like, okay, so you and I, we agree, or you and your partner agreed. So now you see your partner's wagers. This is tracked in the brain, and you change your final wager accordingly. On the other hand, if you disagree, then you do not track the partner's wager. You just don't care. It's like the signal, oh, disagreeing, so the other person is not providing any information that is important, and hence you don't change your final wager. Okay, so these are basically the same routes, the central and the peripheral route right here, in the same brain, with the same source, with the same game, just depending on one clue whether the other person agreed or disagreed. So here you can basically see in our experiment whether you switched on the central route or the peripheral route, all depended on whether the partner agreed with you or disagreed with me, disagreed with you. Okay, so there's one signal that either engaged your brain or disengaged your brain. And you can see basically that, like, when you think about this, right? If you think about these attempts here, where they basically, so here it was like they agree or disagreeing as the signal. Here, Donald Trump is trying to influence you using the peripheral route by using fear. You might just think, oh, that's so scary, I will not change my mind. I leave with my opinion that vaccinations are caused by that autism cause vaccination cause autism. Or here you can say like, oh, this is just one signal. It's a handsome guy drinking coffee, hence the coffee must be good. Now I like Nespresso a little bit more. Two kind of clear signals to use the peripheral route. So now what we're going to do is basically kind of look at the research and showing like when do people use the central route and when do they use the peripheral route. And it depends on kind of three different factors that obviously also interact with each other. So first, who's sending the message, okay? Who's the person that is talking? And we will look in the next video on the influence of the person talking on the persuasiveness of the message. Speaking of the message, that's the next one. This is, we look at the message itself. How can I frame a content to make sure that my message is more persuasive or less persuasive than, how can I make sure that my message is very persuasive? That's a better way to put it. And at the end, we look at like, okay, at the audience, all right? So who, does it depend on whether there's a persuasive message, on who's listening and who is not? So these are our next three upcoming videos. One on the source, one on the message itself, and one on the audience.